Welcome to Bringing Distance Learning to Life, Human Elements of Online Learning, which is the second webinar in our Distance Learning Support webinar series. My name is Claire Rice, Senior Director of Communications at PLTW, and I will be one of your chat moderators for this webinar. Today, we welcome our network of educators from across the country to learn more about PLTW's distance learning support and to discuss strategies on bringing human elements to distance learning experiences. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few tips on how to maximize your webinar experience. Join the conversation, share your story, and ask questions by engaging with fellow participants and PLTW subject matter experts in the chat. Our facilitators and subject matter experts will be available to answer questions during the webinar. I'd also like to invite you to contribute strategies in the chat that you've used or that you plan to use this fall as you head back to school. Feel free to add your tips and ideas in the chat throughout our time together today. Time may not allow for us to answer all questions in the live environment. After the webinar, you will have access to an FAQ document based on the questions that we receive through the chat. PLTW will use polls and other engagement strategies in this webinar, so please make sure you have disabled any pop-up blockers so you can engage in the activities. PLTW will also utilize a free engagement tool called Fun Retro, which facilitates collaborative reflection within a team. You will hear more about this tool later, and we'll add information about the tools into companion documents with the webinar recording. Before we jump into our content for today, we want to get a feel for your facilitation comfort level with a quick poll. So you should see a poll on your screen now, which is going to gauge your experience with online learning. And I'll give everyone just a few seconds here to answer. Okay, great. Thank you everyone for participating in that. Next, I'd like to introduce our special guests. Kelly Garcia, who is a Gateway and High School Master Teacher, Jazz Johnson, who is a Principles of Engineering Master Teacher, and Kristen Robinson, a Launch Master Teacher, all who will help present today and share their own personal stories about how they have integrated strategies to grow relationships and community within their distance learning classrooms. They will also be part of our group chat to help answer any questions related to today's webinar. To get us started, I'd like to introduce Dr. Heather Baker, PLTW Senior Director, to kick us off and walk us through our agenda and some introductory information about PLTW's distance learning supports that have been created.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you all for joining us today for our second webinar in our series. If you missed the first one, you can access it on the pltw.org webpage. All of the webinars, including the one today, will be recorded and placed on the pltw.org webpage within a week after it's been held. So we shared this during our July 28th and 30th webinar that you can review if you missed it, but we wanted to briefly share all of the supports that are available to the network. As you can see, PLTW has developed supports for teachers, students, caregivers, administrators, and other educators that may work with students. These supports may be accessed through the courses, online in our distance learning webpage, and via additional online opportunities like webinars, educator forums, and My PLTW community. These are our guides to online learning. Again, we shared this during our July 28th and 30th webinars, but want to remind you that they are there for you. All of the ideas that we are talking about today are in these guides. Our consultant, Catherine Kennedy, who you will hear from shortly, has brought many minds together to develop these 8 guides, each of which focuses on guidance for key stakeholders who help support students as they learn. The guides provide information about PLTW's distance learning support, as well as guidance on creating a supportive online and blended learning experience. For today's webinar, we will be focusing on bringing distance learning to life and talking about research-based practices and strategies to intentionally incorporate human elements when you are teaching and learning online. These elements include building positive relationships, fostering interaction in a variety of ways, cultivating community within your online learning environment, providing targeted student supports, and prioritizing student, caregiver, and educator well-being. We will end our time with some brief Q&A before we close. But before we get started, we're going to engage you in another poll. Because we are focusing on building relationships, we want to know what relationship building strategies you normally use in your classroom. So we'll just take a minute to let you vote on that. That's great. So it looks like a lot of you are doing a lot of different strategies to build those relationships. And we do have some time set up just to briefly share out. So maybe for some of those that selected other, or if you want to share out a different strategy, if you can use the reactions tool at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand, Shannon will call on you if she sees a hand raise. Anybody want to share out? Well, just remember, if you do have something that you want to share, you can do that in the chat box within Zoom. And we always encourage you to use the PLTW community in MyPLTW. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Catherine Kennedy. Catherine is supporting PLTW as our online learning researcher and consultant. She has over 15 years experience in online, blended, and digital learning in pre-K through 12, higher education, and beyond. She's brought her research, practice, and policy experience to PLTW, collaborating with us to build the supports that we are sharing with you through these webinars and forums. So Catherine, over to you.
I think we did lose her. I don't see her anywhere.
Well, I will keep going, and when she joins back in, she can kick me out of the way. How about that?
Sounds good. Go for it.
Awesome.
So happens in the classroom, right? Here we go.
I know, exactly.
Pivot.
Exactly. Pivot. Okay, so from what we know from many years of research and practice, online learning takes so much intentional planning, which I'm sure you guys experienced in the spring. Most of what we experienced as educators, caregivers, and students in the spring was not true online learning. It was emergency or crisis remote learning. No one was prepared for it, and we did all the best that we could with what we had. Only those schools and districts that were already truly doing online and blended learning were likely able to adapt somewhat to what was happening. But even then, everyone was running into decision-making processes that they were just not prepared for. Additionally, some of what we saw in the spring was recreating this class schedule online, which took a lot out on teachers, caregivers, and students. As we dig into today's content, one of the big shifts that happens in online learning is moving away from whole class instruction to more one-on-one and small group work. Also important is that the learning that happens in real time online is more active and interactive with discussions, problem solving, etc. Any direct live instruction should be kept on the short side and sent in video if possible ahead of an active live learning session. This allows students to also continuously review those videos if they didn't understand the concept the first time. I know some schools, districts, and programs require teachers to meet with their full class every day. If that's the case, you can think differently about how to approach that time, such as using breakout rooms for project work, problem solving, work sessions, etc. These shifts allow for more opportunities to bring the human elements into our online learning environments, which we're going to jump into now. So as I mentioned, we will be focusing on sharing research-based best practices and strategies to help you bring your distance learning experience to life by intentionally incorporating human elements into your online learning environment. So I'm going to jump into building relationships. One of the activities that I engage in Catherine engages in regularly in her consulting work is conducting evaluations and case studies of how digital learning is implemented in schools, districts, and programs around the world. And after talking with students, caregivers, and educators within those schools, districts, and programs, the most successful ones are the ones that focus on building relationships. It's not about technology or the curriculum, it's about those relationships. Once those trusting relationships are built, then everything else follows and we'll have a strong foundation to build upon. So what kind of research-based best practices and strategies do these programs use? They're really not in any particular order, importance-wise. So we'll just start from the top with orientations.
Hey,
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just pause right there. I think Catherine is back.
Yay, Catherine.
So sorry, those things like technology where we just drop off the face of the planet.
Awesome. Well, we're ready for orientations.
Okay, great. Let me just find my place here. Thank you for your patience, everyone. These programs that Heather mentioned that I evaluate and do case studies for offer orientations to the learning environments in which the learning will take place. And these orientations are focused mostly on how the student can connect with support systems via the teacher or other educators or other students, etc. And the orientations are also provided for a student's caregivers, as oftentimes, especially for the younger students, as we saw in the spring, caregivers like parents, siblings, community members, and others are helping the students navigate the learning space. Another strategy used by these programs is to do introductions online, either recorded or live. These are introductions for both teachers and students. And for introductions, the best relationship building strategies center on authentic sharing about who you truly are as a human being. And this will help your students see you as a real individual, especially if you share your interests and outside activities, and especially if you are meeting for the first time in an online setting, which I know a lot of schools are doing right now. The next strategy includes welcome letters and or welcome calls. Welcome calls specifically via web conferencing or phone are used by many online schools to welcome students and their families. And this is where you provide your contact info, your office hours, learning requirements and expectations. And this is also a great way to get to know more about your students personally, especially if you're starting out the year fully online, which I know, again, many schools and districts reopening plans that are doing just that. So the more you can get to know your students personally in this welcome call, the faster you are going to build their trust. As a former and current online teacher myself, we have a lot of students to keep track of. And one strategy that has been really helpful for me is to create a spreadsheet of students. And then during the welcome call, I take notes in that spreadsheet so I can make note of nicknames or preferred names, any hobbies, interests, or pets they talk about, so that I can reference them the next time that I interact with them. And that is one of the tools that we'll be sharing with you at the end of the webinar. Regular and consistent communication is so important when learning online, and one of the strategies that I saw work really well to help boost student engagement and satisfaction was by incorporating regular and consistent weekly personalized messages. And these can be weekly individual updates on progress or weekly kudos emails, personal well-being check-ins, which we'll also emphasize later. We suggest using a template so that you're not recreating for every student, and then personalizing those templates based on feedback communication to each individual student. The teachers who did this from the programs that I mentioned before had students and their caregivers reaching out to them to say thank you so much for the emails, because it really kept them going. And with everything going on in the world today, these can definitely be a big pick-me-up for your students and their families, but also for you as an educator. Another strategy is to host office hours where students can come in as they need to, and even parents when they have questions. The key with office hours is to keep it consistent time-wise each week and make sure that they are documented in your welcome letter and or in your learning management system or class website. Many online teachers also enjoy building relationships through one-on-one meetings. As I mentioned, or as Heather mentioned before in the disclaimer, online learning shifts your classroom to a place for small groups and one-on-one meetings with students. You can do whole group meetings sometimes, but it's best to keep those to a minimum if possible. The last strategy for building relationships is to do open work sessions. This is where you host a Zoom session, students join, preferably no more than 10 at a time, and you do as needed tutoring while everyone is working on an assignment or a project. You can also pair students together in these groups in breakout rooms to have them provide guidance to each other or work collaboratively on tasks or group work as needed. A quick note on time, which might sound like a bit of a nightmare right now in terms of interacting with all of 150 or 280 students that you might have, especially if you're in high school or middle school. What I want to emphasize is that within my spreadsheet that I mentioned that we'll be sharing out as a template for you to use if you're interested, which I count each time I am in touch with a student individually as a single touch point. And that touch point can include, but is not limited to, a weekly individualized email, a phone call, a web conference, which includes a small group work, individualized and personalized feedback on an assignment or project, office hours, work sessions, etc. So if you have one personalized touch point per week with each of your students, that is great. And that is what you want to aim for. So it doesn't have to be the same for every student. You don't have to do all of those touch points at once, but you want to have at least one single touch point that is very personalized to each of your students each week if possible. And this is typically required support structure schedule for those online programs I mentioned before that I work with. So I hope that is helpful to you as well, especially if you are embarking, or if you've already embarked. I saw a couple of comments that you guys are in your second week, some of you, on a fully online or blended start to the fall. So now I'd like to ask our master teachers to share briefly about how they built relationships with their students in a distance learning format. And we'll start with Kristen. What are some strategies you have used that have worked or maybe didn't work so well?
Thank you, Catherine. Well, I'll tell you one that doesn't work, and that is a group sing-along. We tried that, and that was a major fail because you can't have everyone's audio going at once. So I do not suggest that. But a lot of the things that you mentioned are things that I did with my fourth graders since I'm coming from an elementary perspective. Fun Zoom meetings, scavenger hunts, things that I know that a lot of us, probably did back in the spring, were just a really great way to kind of break down that barrier of just feeling so strange in this new teaching situation that the kids found themselves in. I really tried to bring our community meetings into more of like an SEL focus so that we were utilizing different opportunities to really just check in with the kids and for them to kind of feel like we're all in this together. So, of course, in the spring, things were a little bit different then, but, just really taking that chance to connect with the kids, show them that, that I was feeling the same things that they were feeling as well, so that we just knew that we were all supported. And then just also opening up that one-on-one opportunity for office hours. And those kids kind of caught on to, hey, if I go into those office hours, I can talk to my teacher kind of, all on my own and have a little bit of her undivided attention. And so that was another great experience that we were able to have.
Awesome, Kristen. I love the idea of scavenger hunts. It sounds like a lot of fun. So how about you, Kelly?
I tried a lot of different things like Kristen. I did emoji check-in. So when students logged in, they would do a little quiz that would let me know which emoji they were feeling that day. And I did some phone calls and Zoom games and things like that. But I think the thing that was most meaningful to my students, and I think even to me, was I would have snack breaks where my students would log into Zoom with their snack and we would just all kind of take that break together. It would give us an opportunity to talk about what they were watching on Netflix and books they were reading and just ways they were kind of coping with having to be home. And it seemed to work out really well, and I think that was my favorite thing.
I love the idea of doing snack breaks. Thank you so much for sharing, Kelly. Jazz, how about you?
A lot of those same things. I think as a high school teacher, one of the things that I found that some of those things that we maybe put in that elementary box, scavenger hunts, stuff like that. Big kids love games too. So don't forget that. They love stickers, scratch and sniff if you can get them. One of the things that I found really, when we were doing those Google Hangouts, about really connecting with those kids was just being vulnerable with them and telling them that I was, nervous and scared and anxious and all the things that they were feeling, and talked about that it's okay to feel those things and that we just have to make sure that we really leaned on each other and really focused on that relationship more than content. And that, I think, was what at least got me through. Hopefully got the kids through as well.
Yeah, knowing that you're not alone in this is so very important for everybody. I believe. So before I pass it over to Heather, I'd like to ask a quick question of everybody in our audience. So we're going to use another poll for this, and they're a great way to have a quick way to check understanding or garner more information from your own students as well. So our question for you is, which of these strategies that I just shared are you most excited to try? And you can select all that apply. So it looks like it's close across the board for everybody's interest areas. Winning out is open work sessions. Those are a lot of fun. And students really like to help each other too. So those are really helpful for that. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Heather to talk about the next approach to bringing distance learning to life and adding human elements, which is fostering interaction. Heather?
Thanks, Catherine. Almost forgot to unmute. So just like in-person learning, there are many ways for students to interact with content, teachers, and other students. So for distance learning, teachers have to think through those interactions a little bit differently and probably a little bit more intentionally. It may seem more difficult to provide multiple ways for students to interact, but we hope that we can provide you with some options for all of those intersections. In a distance learning environment, it's critical that teachers have effective and regular communication with students, as well as to ensure that students have a safe, productive learning environment at home. So teachers can regularly discuss content with students and provide meaningful feedback. And to ensure students are successful, teachers should also integrate academic integrity and digital citizenship when talking with students, as well as making sure that students have equitable access to what they need for learning. In order for students to engage with each other, the teacher should facilitate and organize those connections. And I see lots of things in chat about this, so this is great. But as Catherine mentioned earlier, teachers can work in small groups and work sessions, as well as peer-to-peer interactions that may include those work sessions, peer reviews, or simple check-ins. Because you can't necessarily read body language in distance learning format, it's important for teachers to work in ways for students to show their interest and voice. I think I heard Kelly say she used emojis, so that's great. Or submit pictures of their pets, things like that, show and tell. So doing so also allows teachers to discuss safe and respectful communication as well. Accessing and interacting with the academic content of the course is obviously very important. So it's important for the content to be provided in a variety of ways. The same holds true for ways that students show mastery of their learning. Universal design for learning principles are useful to guide teachers in both of those areas. Think of fun videos, reading, guest speakers, audio podcasts, recorded presentations, and so many other ways that you guys can think of to engage students in that content. Students need to know how they're doing in processing that content as well. So regular and effective feedback is a key element to student performance. And last but certainly not least, make sure to provide those deadlines and due dates to keep students in the know so that they can complete their work. And then within a school district, there are so many systems that students are expected to engage with. Teachers obviously have to understand and be able to use all of those systems so that they can support the students. So we have an online learner readiness rubric that will be sent to you embedded into the webinar, but you can also find those in our online learning guides so that you can see where students will need the support. This will help teachers understand where to provide or ask for any additional technical assistance for students. It's also helpful to have office hours, as Catherine mentioned, for students to pop in and ask questions so that you avoid taking away instructional time. This could also be a way to address technical and accessibility issues with the systems. We We know also that it takes a village to educate students, especially in distance learning. We want to make all other educators and experts available to students. We encourage teachers to include ways to engage with other educators and experts in the classroom, whether it is in school or online. Teachers can also include guest speakers or other community supports. It's important to include and schedule in time for students to access their required supports relevant to like an IEP or a 504 or ELP as well. So again, I'd like to ask our master teachers to share briefly about how they have facilitated those different interactions with their students in a distance learning format, and what are some strategies that you've used that's worked, or maybe it didn't work. So let's see, Jazz, how about we start with you this time?
All right, well, so just as far as building kind of community among my students, one of the things that I did was, I teach high school, so my capstone, my EDD kids, of course, have been through all my classes, and I was able to have them pair up with somebody in a class below them, actually put them into little groups, so they have almost a mentor person that they could reach out to if they couldn't get a hold of me during the course of the day while we were kind of off in the spring and doing virtual. And that really helped, I think, having another point of contact just to answer a question for that student.
Yeah, that's really important to make sure that they have the connections they need. How about Kristen?
All right, so with my kids, especially once again, coming from that elementary standpoint here, a lot of the things that we tried to do were really through our platform that we used, which we used Seesaw with my school. And so just really giving the kids those opportunities to post things, to share with each other so that they could comment back. We really focused on just knowing that they were kind of holed off in their homes, and we wanted to keep that connection going for them. So, as much as they could do with doing recordings and, encouraging the kids to comment and just to interact as much as they possibly could on Seesaw, that was kind of, more of the independent piece to it. And then, something that I did a lot just in my own PLTW trainings when I started doing online trainings, just using breakout rooms with the kids and our Zoom meetings, and just getting them to see that, even, as young students, we are able to go off and, have those conversations with smaller groups, and just kind of give them that chance to not constantly always be in this whole group situation with each other all the time, even though I was as closely as possible facilitating as much as I could. But I just felt like it was nice for them to kind of go off a little bit sometimes as well and get to talk to each other.
Thanks for sharing that, Kristen. How about Kelly?
Well, like Kristen, I did also use a lot of technology and Zoom breakout rooms. Our platform was Schoology. One of the things that I really focused on doing was really sharing with my students that, there were some things I was going to learn too, and the distance learning was difficult for me as well. So we sort of agreed that we were going to try one new thing a week. And so we used Flipgrid and Jamboard and a couple of other apps where we were just kind of trying things out and doing things in a new way. And that seemed to work really well for all of us.
Those are really great ideas. I wonder if the three of you could also address maybe tips and tricks on how did you teach your students to do those things?
I'll jump in first, because with our kids, this was new. I know that there's a lot of people listening who are maybe one-to-one at their school and things like that. And that's just not my district. That's where we're going at this point. But at the time, we were really scrambling to get the kids technology that they needed. And so we made tutorial videos that we shared with the kids, posted as much as we could on Seesaw for them to really explore the tools that they had available to them on there. And so just as much, as I could kind of from the beginning within our whole class Zoom meetings, sharing my screen, showing them, the different places they needed to go, that really, we don't forget, we know this, but kids catch on to things very quickly, but it was still new to them. And so I just felt like, the more we could give them tutorial wise, the better. And I think it really paid off in the long run.
One of the things that I asked my students to do was I would put them in breakout rooms and give them an opportunity to explore a new app, just kind of play around with it together in smaller groups. And more often than not, they were teaching me how to use it. So that was a great way to get them comfortable.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Sometimes just creating a quick 1 or 2 minute screencast on how to use a piece of technology can be really helpful. That way they can come back to it. Even if you've gone over it in class, you know, they don't always pay attention, shocker. And so
Surely
having
not.
that for them to come back and just labeling it, hey, here's how to do this. And then putting it up for them.
Yeah, Screencast-O-Matic is my savior for sure. I'm right there with you, Jazz.
Yep.
It has to be TikTok length, right? Well, thanks for sharing all of those great ideas, guys. So as we are all learning, we will be facing yet another number of challenges in implementing distance learning. For many of you, school has started. Some of you are getting ready to start. So one of those challenges is to build a safe space that allows students to feel a sense of belonging to a community that is normally in person. So not only do we want to ensure access to technology, we also want to ensure that students don't feel isolated in their learning and that they have a strong sense of belonging to the course, the teacher, and other students. Equally, just as we do with our school, within school courses, we want to ensure that students feel that they have a sense of identity and cultural relevance online, as well as a good understanding of that netiquette. We've provided some simple reflective questions for teachers to utilize. These questions will help you think through ways to enable students to connect to increase that level of belonging. The questions will also be available within this webinar content for you, but wanted to just kind of give you some guidance, reflective questions there. So Catherine's going to provide some information now on targeted supports for students.
Thanks, Heather. So many of the elements that Heather, Kelly, Kristen, Jazz, and I have shared so far, and as many of you are sharing in the chat as well, are all supports for your students. And there are some others we want to emphasize here. In as many ways as possible, we encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to collaborate with other educators. And this can include the school librarian, educational technologists, ELL specialists, special education teachers, mentors, counselors, etc. Ask for help, be vulnerable, ask for critical feedback, shadow others, and share your best practices. Also, provide individualized support through one-on-one meetings, which we mentioned already in the Build Relationship section of the webinar, as well as offer just-in-time tutoring. Related to that, figure out what wraparound supports are needed for students and families. These could be academic, social, emotional, mental, behavioral, and other. For administrators specifically, think about different ways to use your staff and faculty. What roles need to shift to better support the online learning environment? Again, many of the online schools and programs that I study are thinking creatively and differently about the way they create their infrastructure to best support all stakeholders. And this could be a good time for districts and schools to do the same if they haven't already done so. And finally, but honestly, one of the most important human elements is prioritizing well-being, making sure your staff is trauma-informed, that everything you are providing to students and caregivers is equitable, that you are doing wellness check-ins on all stakeholders, including staff, faculty, students, caregivers, and others. One of the superintendents with whom I work said it best when he said, "You have to Maslow before you bloom." Does everyone have the basic human needs? Do they have food, shelter, water, safety, security? Until we work through our own trauma, especially from the spring, and help our colleagues and students do so as well, there is no foundation upon which learning can happen. So this is critical. And now I'd like to introduce you to Shannon Esposito. Shannon has 16 years of teaching experience, a master's plus 60 credit hours in education and instructional technology. She is also a former PLTW teacher and master teacher, as well as a current PLTW team member. And Shannon will be facilitating a panel discussion with our master teachers to further discuss some of these strategies to hear more about their tips and tricks they use in their practice. Shannon, take it away. You're muted.
I got it, sorry. Thank you so much, Catherine. Okay, so we have 3 questions that we're going to ask of our panelists today. So please continue to use the chat room. Sorry, there we go. Okay. Please continue to use the chat room to comment or ask questions. And again, if you want to ask a question of one of our panelists specifically, go ahead and use that @ sign to be able to tag them in that. All right, so first question, how do you encourage students to be themselves in a distance learning format? And in what ways do you personally share with your students? Kelly, let's go ahead and start with you.
We just try to do a lot of fun things to start the class. One of my favorite, and I think our students' favorite, is I would ask them to make their background a photo of their dream vacation spot or the set of their favorite TV show. So we had a lot of kids who really liked Friends, and so Monica's Apartment and Central Perk were 2 really popular backgrounds. Also, I would share my backgrounds too, because I thought it was important that students got to know me on a personal level, and that's especially important when you're in that distance background. I think that was the most fun for the kids, and everybody would have something different behind them. And it had the added benefit of protecting their background, so if they weren't comfortable with sharing their space with the whole class, we didn't see it. So it was a double whammy. Worked great.
Excellent. Kristen, how about you?
So one of the first things is, I really wanted to make sure I was meeting them where they were at with what we were doing with our assignments and whatnot. And so really giving them that freedom to respond in a way that they felt most comfortable. We had kind of taken down the barriers a little bit when it came to our content that we were teaching. It was a lot of review. So I felt, comfortable doing that. And so just letting the kids, decide if I want to create a presentation for this, I can let my creative juices flow, write a song as my response. So really trying to keep things a lot more open-ended for them as possible really seemed to help when it, kind of allowed them to let their true self shine through, maybe in a way that wouldn't have happened if we were in the traditional classroom. So that was one thing. The other thing is just kind of like I mentioned before, reminding them that I was human. And I was inviting them into my house, the same way they were inviting me into their own homes with the setting that we were in. And so just keeping them up to date on the things that I had going on outside of our classroom time, and just once again really pushing those opportunities to share those things through posted videos and things like that. I really felt like that really helped us kind of get a little bit more comfortable with the situation that we were in.
Yeah, I love that too, that you're inviting them into your home as well. I think that's so important, and that goes back to that humanizing of who we are and who everyone is, the students included. Okay, last, over to Jazz.
One of the things that I like when we had a lot of Zoom meetings, I was at home, and one of the things I was not afraid is if my kid wanted to jump up in my lap. And the kids, I think sometimes we got to remember that human element, and it's good for them to see that not only am I a teacher, but I'm a dad. And one of the things about letting those kids just be themselves, it's so important to me is, if I give you an assignment and you can prove to me that you understand and you've mastered the concepts and and can answer the essential questions, I don't really care how you give it to me, as long as you prove to me that you know that stuff. And so this online realm, I think we can have this thought that it's a limiting factor, but really to me, if you kind of flip that on its head, and it's like, well, now it allows me to do something that maybe I didn't get a chance to do before. And so really trying to encourage them to be creative.
Yeah, that's a great one too. I think we as teachers have to be very creative, and we have to allow our students to be creative too during this time. That's what's going to get us through it. So great shares, and thank you each for that. Okay, second question. How do you collaborate with other educators to best support yourself, your students, and caregivers in your online learning environment? And Kristen, we'll start with you this time.
All right, so I'm not going to say anything groundbreaking here when it comes to meeting with our teams. We know that we can meet with our teams. I think that this is a great opportunity just to remind teachers, and I'm sure everyone here knows this, but Twitter is just my favorite go-to place when it comes to strategies and finding great educators to follow and following the PLTW network as well. So, I mean, I got so many ideas from Twitter that I was able to take back to my team when we were having those groundbreaking team meetings, and just really getting that opportunity to think outside of the realm of what was going on with my own state or my own school district. And so, that's kind of really my number one thing. YouTube videos was another one I went to as well, just really looking for, once again, those tutorials and things like that that my team could use. So of course I have an amazing team, and they were very supportive as well.
That always helps.
Yes.
Jazz, how about you?
One of the things that we did, and we're still doing, is on Fridays we're having a social hour with our teachers and just a real informal, maybe having an adult beverage and just kind of debriefing and talking with each other. And that has been something that I have looked forward to every week. It's been nice to just have some sense of normalcy and also be able to collaborate, because the people that I work with are why I love what I do, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Okay, Kelly.
Well, what we like to have weekly Zoom meetings and just kind of talk about some of the things that we learned throughout the week. We would share lessons, give each other ideas for how to deliver those lessons, and sometimes we would just cry together because sometimes it was just really hard, and just being there for each other was really important, and just seeing each other and having the time to kind of catch up on things was great.
Yeah, these are all great tips and great ways for us to keep each other together in these hard times. Okay, last question. Oftentimes it's harder to detect students in crisis during distance learning. So what are your look-fors and strategies when it comes to detecting warning signs of students and/or colleagues in crisis in an online learning environment? And let's go ahead, Jazz, can we start with you this time?
Yeah, it really is just about making sure that we're paying attention, even more so about noticing that if somebody is stressed or anxious, or often, that stuff manifests itself into anger. And so just making sure that we're keeping an eye on that. One of the things that I did was I really encouraged my students to reach out to me if they were struggling at all. And whatever means that was through, whether it be a Instagram chat or through Remind or email or Google Classroom, but please reach out. And I had some one-on-one conversations with some kids that were helpful, at least, and they were for me, because it let me know where that kids are struggling. They really are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so true. And it's nice that they know they have someone that they can talk to about that, because many of them struggle in silence, and we don't want that by any stretch. So very important there. Kelly, how about you?
This, when we closed for the spring, I really realized how important my relationships with parents was, because parents felt very comfortable coming to me and letting me know that their student was struggling. And so that was really beneficial. But also knowing my students, who they were friends with. It wasn't uncommon for me to ask my students, text so-and-so and get them out of bed so they can come to class. But when things got really difficult, I think we were about a month in, one of the things that I started doing was going to my students' homes and just writing messages in sidewalk chalk on their driveway or their sidewalk in front of their house. And that was a really great thing, because it helped me too. I needed to connect with my students just like they needed to connect with me. And those personal messages were really, really positive and uplifting. And it kind of got us all back into the swing of things.
Excellent. That's great. Kristen?
Oh, I love that, Kelly.
I know.
So for me with our younger students, I really depended on just if I was seeing them on a weekly basis. Were they coming to our Zoom meetings? They knew that our Zoom meetings were very low stress, and and it was just about, once again, that community time. So it's not like they were going to avoid work if they weren't there. So I really just tried to keep track of who was coming, who wasn't there, reaching out, of course. And then when it really came to that communication, the things that Jazz mentioned, just letting parents know that I was available no matter what. It wasn't, you know, I really reminded them, you know, that it doesn't have to be my office hours. You can send me an email or a text or call me at 10 o'clock at night, whatever you need. But I was just, you know, I really wanted to make sure that they understood that I was going to do anything that I could to make sure that they had the technology that they needed and the resources that they needed. And if I couldn't do it, I was going to find someone else. So just that availability. And like we talked about, just those relationships that we had thankfully built during the school year really did end up paying off. And I think for me going into this school year virtually, that's a good reminder, just knowing that, okay, we're going to have to get creative with building those relationships virtually from the get-go, because they really do pay off in dividends later on. So that, you know, well, thankfully nothing major came up, but, you know, just that accessibility I felt like was so important.
And I think all three of you just proved what superheroes you and all teachers really are, with how much you're willing to do for your students and all. And so thank you for all that you do for students, and thank you for sharing your stories with us. So we hope that you all learned some great strategies here, maybe pulled something from what they discussed, and we hope that you all continue to share with others in the PLTW community from MyPLTW. Also, don't forget that we have an educator forum on September 1st that you can join in order to hear more and share your own strategies. And those will be really great ways to interact and share and learn more with other people. So I am now going to head and turn this back over to Heather, I believe, and do some fun retro.
Yes, thanks, Shannon. So you guys have lots of ideas that are coming across the chat, which is super exciting as I'm reading through those. So we're going to do something, a quick engagement activity to get you to reflect on what you've heard using a tool called Fun Retro, and props go to Shannon for introducing me to this. But a quick introduction to Fun Retro is an easy way to break down simple opportunities in a fun and non-threatening way. It's a tool for quick engagement that will inform as well as allowing participants to contribute thoughts and comments. It's highly engaging and collaborative, but before we get started, and I show you the retro in just a minute on the next slide, I want to share what we're going to do first. So in the chat, we will be putting 3 links in for you to choose, one for high school, one for Gateway, and one for Launch. And so when you see that link, you simply click the link that's appropriate for your level and then enter into the retro. So what we're going to do in the retro is you're going to take a couple of minutes and do a short reflection using the Fun Retro. So in the chat window, you're going to see those links. You're going to go there. When you get into the room, answer the reflective questions. And then we're going to share these comments with the recording. Actually, we're going to share a little bit at the end. So you can hit the like button. You can comment on somebody else's post. But we're going to give you a couple moments to think about the points from today. So as you're thinking about distance learning, what's one thing that you think you want to stop doing? Like, that's not really working so hot, so I'm going to stop doing that. One thing that you want to think about or maybe process a little bit more and think about more. And something that you heard today that you were like, yes, I need to implement this immediately. So I'm just going to stop, let you guys think about that, and then we'll share those live here as they're being populated and talk about it. You guys definitely keep adding to these, but you can see the, I believe we have the Launch one pulled up. Kristen, do you want to just highlight a couple of things, and we're going to move through this and so we can finish up?
Yeah, so I love that, especially the yellow and the green section are getting really filled up. I think that spreadsheet is definitely something that a lot of us are interested in. I know I'm interested in it as well. And then just really looking at, you know, kind of the way that we do approach Meet the Teacher and the way that we make our meetings a lot more interactive look like to be some of the highlights that we have from ours. So great responses.
Awesome. How about, can we, Andrea, pull up Gateway? Kristen, or Kelly, sorry, you want to just highlight just a couple things? Unmute yourself.
Sorry,
There you
yes.
go.
Well, I just love somebody put that one of the things that they're going to stop doing is worrying. And I just think that's wonderful. And I'm going to join that group and stop that myself. But a lot of folks are thinking about ways to engage their students with weekly newsletters, with the snack breaks, just informal conversation with peers. And I really like that a lot of teachers are looking at starting their class with music. So they'll be copying Project Lead the Way's strategy for beginning that meeting. I love that.
That's great. And if we can just highlight quickly high school, Jazz, what couple do you want to highlight?
Couple things for the stop doing. It's working too many hours per day. We got to remember that we're still husbands, wives, moms, dads, brothers, sisters, sons. So definitely that. Another thing is making students share their video. We've touched on a little bit of that. That can sometimes put students, as long as they're active, engaged, you call on them, they answer, they chat.
Awesome. Well, hopefully, thanks, Andrea. You can go back to the slide deck. Hopefully, you guys like this tool. We kind of thought it was fun. So we're going to go ahead and move towards the next phase. And just, I want to briefly just kind of sandwich this in. So the PLTW guides to online learning that we talked about earlier, they're available for you to download. So we discussed everything that we've discussed are in those guides. And remember that those guides are developed for all stakeholders, including program coordinators, site coordinators, administrators, other educators, teachers, caregivers, students, all of that. And they're grounded in research, but we really think that they're going to provide the network with the knowledge that needed for meaningful distance learning experience. So we're going to try to close out pretty quickly here with some Q&A very briefly with Claire.
Thank you, Heather. We do have just a few minutes left, so we've received some great questions in the chat throughout the webinar, and I think it would be great to start with a few of those before we wrap up. So the first question is for Catherine. In the building relationships section, you talk about the importance of connecting one-on-one with each student each week. And we saw a couple of comments through the chat saying, well, I have a lot of students, so that might be really overwhelming. Catherine, can you provide some insight into how to keep that manageable? Oh, Catherine, you're on mute.
You're mute.
Good.
Yeah.
Rookie mistake. Really great question. And definitely one that I've worked through quite a bit myself as an online teacher, as well as seen done in the online schools that I do case studies with. So at first it does sound like a bit of a crazy idea, especially again, if you're in high school or middle school with 150 to 180 students, but you'll be receiving that sample spreadsheet. I'm so excited that there's so many people interested in it. And I like to use it and we'll send it along with the webinar recording. But within that spreadsheet, I count each time I am in touch with a student individually as, again, a single touch point. And this can be really personalized feedback on an assignment, individual kudos emails, phone calls, small group meetings, office hours, work sessions, or maybe, like Kelly mentioned, snack break. So I try to have one check mark for each student where I provide one personalized touch point per week with each of them. And that is, again, what you should aim for. And just to make sure that each one is getting a personalized touch point with each week.
Thanks for adding that additional context, Catherine. We have time for one more question. So Heather, this one's for you. When thinking about distance learning, how can teachers combat social isolation for themselves as well as for their students?
Oh man, yeah, that was rough in the spring, wasn't it? So yeah, we noted last spring that we needed to pay attention to our own well-being, obviously, and that of our students. So I can think of a couple things that we discussed today, just to kind of reiterate. First is developing that network of critical friends. I think all three of our guest speakers talked about that, connecting with them to share, cry, whatever. So whether it's within your school or your district or in the online community, like in my PLTW, we still want you to connect and socialize. So for students, to keep students from feeling isolated, I think that teachers have to be really intentional about setting up those student interactions. So, you know, in an in-person setting, there's lunch and recess and passing periods and all of that. But in distance learning, we don't have that. So we have to create it. And I think Kelly mentioned this, but having those group snack breaks together on Zoom, I thought that was a great idea. And teachers can also think about implementing those small group connections with students. Teachers typically know what friend groups that exist among their students. So just giving them an opportunity to socialize, I think, is helpful.
Great. Well, thank you, Heather and Catherine, for answering both of those questions. And thanks to all of our attendees for your engagement and dialogue in the chat today. It's been great seeing everyone share their ideas and their thoughts. And again, I'd like to reiterate that we will have an FAQ document that includes answers to the questions that were asked today available when this webinar is over. And now I'm going to pass it back to Heather for final thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So just a couple of other reminders for you guys before you leave. First, the webinar is going to be sent. It's recorded, and all of the chat and all of the additional materials. But we do have additional virtual events coming up with webinars, educator forums, and our engagement office hours. So as you can see, we have a couple of events happening soon. Also, Project Lead the Way has provided some pre-recorded videos to assist with some of those common topics, like rostering students and such. So all of those can be found on the pltw.org webpage. So once you're on that page, you click the Learn More to navigate to the distance learning microsite. And then once you are at that microsite, you select resources. And then you select the resource that you want to view. You can see that there are several listed, so just select Learn More. But to view upcoming virtual events, select upcoming events where you can register for webinars and educator forums as soon as registration opens. So make sure to visit the educator forum section so that you can vote on topics too. And you'll be able to find information about office hours here too. So before we close out, we have one last final poll for you. So it's popped up there. So we would just like to hear more thoughts about what you guys are excited about. So as always, any additional questions or feedback or comments, you can submit to the Solution Center. The email is right there. And we want to thank you again for participating, and reminder that the recording for the webinar will be made available and posted on our webpage in about a week. In addition, you'll have all the companion documents that we mentioned, which are the reflective questions, the online readiness rubric, and the student tracking sheet that Catherine mentioned. So we really appreciate your time and energy and passion to students, but have a great rest of your day and let us know if you need anything.